My name is Gautam Bhan. I'm one of the faculty members here and part of the teaching faculty for the Urban Fellows program. So the way we'll run this is that I will take about 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning and just lay out the content for today's webinar, which is to talk about the commons and the electives as part of the curriculum structure for the program. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions. You can direct your questions by typing into that chat window, and I'll see them, read out the questions and answer them one by one. We can either do this on the commons and electives, but also feel free to ask questions about any part of the program as you look like. So before we start, just a quick tech check. If all of you can just type in yes into your question box so that I know that you can hear me. I'll just wait to see some of the yeses and we'll start. Okay, great. That's a couple of you. Can a couple of more people type in? Perfect. Okay, good. So it sounds like the tech is working. Okay, so let's get going. So all of you know, and I would really encourage you to spend a fair amount of time on the part of the website that talks about the curriculum design. I think it's core to the logic of the fellowship, and I think one of the key things that we want to see when you apply is that actually you spend some time thinking about the way the fellowship is structured and telling us why you think that curriculum design works for you and makes you want to apply to the fellowship. So the two key components about the fellowship's curriculum structure, the first is what we call the commons. So the commons is core to IIHS's pedagogical philosophy. What does it mean to think about a commons? Let's take an example of an urban issue that you may want to engage with. Say you want to get water into an urban slum, okay? So what you're asking here is, what kind of knowledge do you need to bring water into an urban slum? Now, immediately when you start thinking about it, you start thinking about the way in many interconnected knowledges are put together in this. You're going to need an engineer who will lay down the pipes, understand how to work with the pipes and to get it out. You're going to need an economist who's going to tell you how to price the water that comes out of those pipes, right? And how to link the supply of that water to actual usage mediated through its price and affordability mechanisms. You may have a case where the water is free because you treat it as a public good. You may have a case where the water is priced, where you treat it as a commodity good. But in both cases, you have to both think about the household's ability to pay for it, as well as the utility's ability to sustainably provide it. Because if either of those two ends break, even though there's water flowing in a material infrastructure of a pipe, that water is not actually sustainably going to reach those households. You're going to need a person who understands gender and sociology, because they're going to realize that the pipe is connected to the time currently taken to think about water, and that collection of water is predominantly a gendered activity that is largely taken on by adolescent girls and women, that either takes away their time from other work or is one of the largest reasons why girls drop out, say, of senior secondary schooling. You're also going to need a sociologist of caste who's going to be able to understand that even if you build the engineering perfect pipe and you price it right and you think of gender consideration, the timing it comes, where you place the tap in the slum is going to determine a caste-based geography of access to it. Right? So if you think about just this one example, this idea of saying, here's a problem where water has to be provided to an urban slum, you realize that you need a set of knowledges and practices to actually fully understand the conception of the problem, the design of the quote-unquote solution of the practice, as well as the understanding what is the question I'm really trying to answer. The commons is exactly this. The commons is the place where you realize that our disciplines and our approaches to urban questions typically come from a narrower band of how to think about problems. And we actually need to shift that into an interdisciplinary way of looking at this. The example I just gave you shows you actually what that interdisciplinarity does to A, what is the question you think you're trying to answer, but also what is the practice that you form. Now, it's not that we need every practitioner to be an economist and a sociologist and an engineer and an economist. It is that we need each of these to understand that the other practices and knowledges are implicated in the way we think about the issues, right? So it's partly about knowing who else needs to be on the table with you, what else is involved in this. The commons is that part of the curriculum that prepares you to think and talk across disciplines. So our current batch of fellows, for example, among the 35 of them has 26 different degrees. How does a batch like that talk to each other? How does each of them find a sense of urban practice? The commons is where we teach the economist how to think spatially, the anthropologist how to think financially, the financial economist how to think in terms of caste and gender, the development studies person and how to think materially. And we teach you a common vocabulary of urban practice across your disciplines. So it's the 10-week opening to the course. It is the crucial part which actually lays the foundations for your learning journey through the course, because it gives you a way to talk across disciplines, skills, methods, and languages. And the commons is two key parts. One is the practica, which some of you heard about in the last webinar, which is that you spend 2 of every 5 days, 2 days every week, you spend in neighborhoods in the city. Because the one thing that intersects all the theoretical things we teach you is place. So we may teach you, theory of one kind on Monday morning and theory of the second kind on Tuesday morning and a mixed theory on Wednesday morning. But it's only when on Thursday afternoon you're in a neighborhood trying to understand what you see around you that all those concepts will actually begin to connect. And so the commons is the practica running on one side and 6 theory weeks that run on parallel to it. Those 6 are to us the key building blocks of urban interdisciplinarity. So you open with a week on identity, which I teach, in which we see the city as being composed of a set of social relations that we study in different years through a particular identity, through caste, through gender, through religion, etc. Then we look at planning, economy, governance, ecology, and infrastructure. So you see 6 very different thematics. And for each of you who come from different disciplines, there'll be a week in which you're very familiar and a week in which will be completely new for you. And that's partly the experience of the commons, right? It's about beginning for the class to learn how to talk to each other and become peer learners. And these 6 conceptual concepts give you, in a sense, a framing vocabulary in how to think about urban areas beyond the way you were trained to think about them, if you were trained to think about them at all. So it's in a sense like a stage. It's a foundation of that interdisciplinarity. Because otherwise what we've done is we've just admitted a whole set of people with very different degrees and not actually taught them how to move beyond their degrees. For many of you who also don't come from what you consider urban backgrounds like planning or architecture, this is where you should believe us that we're admitting you for a reason, and we will give you that vocabulary, and that you will find a way to become urbanists through the program, even if you aren't those. So we're not being idle when we say we welcome applications from every kind of discipline. We're saying that we are structured as a program to anticipate a mixed disciplinary class, right? That's the way our curriculum is structured, and the commons is the key part of that. So the commons will feel very taut, very heavy, and we will hold you back from solution and proposition. We will stop you actively from saying, don't look too far for what to do. First, take a step back and say, why is this the way it is? Why is it structurally the way it is? Why is the question I'm answering the question I'm answering? So the commons will actually hold you back from a certain set of immediate proposition and practice. And for many of you who end up joining the fellowship, you will complain about this, as every batch does. And you will talk about being held back from action, and you will say it's all structural and it's theoretical and these are ideas, but I want to do things. And just by the time you're royally frustrated about not being allowed to do things, the commons will end and you will go into the electives. And that's precisely the way the course is structured. The electives then make a different shift from the commons. So if the commons is to give you an interdisciplinary foundation, the electives are for you to now say, okay, now head into complexity. So how do we do the electives? We have 4 elective cycles. These are 2-week intensive workshop studios, basically, on thematics. There's several kinds. So there are theoretical electives, which are themed. So some examples of theoretical electives from last year would be urban and regional economic development, or southern urban theory, or spatial thinking. They're conceptual, complex theoretical electives. So they're about applying the kind of commons concepts in real situations, but they are still very much within a conceptual and theoretical paradigm. They are sector-based electives that are much more tangible, linked to professional sectors of practice. So sanitation is a sectoral elective, housing is a sectoral elective, transport is a sectoral elective. Then there are technical electives that are about methods, which are very specific practice cases of professional instruments that you need in your professional life. So for example, impact evaluation, or environment and social impact assessments, or a course on the current urban missions, right? That are they're sort of sets that for things that you really need to hold and that you really need to do. Right? And there are also, electives that then look at things like the digital urban labor market, or urban health, or look at policy evaluation as a technique, look at urban economics. So as you're seeing that you will have a wide range of choices in your electives. The commons everyone takes, there's no choice in that. The electives you choose. So we basically offer about 3 choices per elective cycle, and you take one of those 3 courses at a time. This is deeply intensive. So over the 4 cycles, you essentially take 4 electives out of a total choice set of 12. The website has a list of previous and current electives, and the electives on offer this year, and one set of those 12 will be offered this year as well. And so you can imagine over your 4 electives, basically taking a theory elective, you take Southern Urban Theory, then you take a very technical elective like policy evaluation, and you take a sector elective like sanitation, and you take an elective on media and the city because it's something you just always wanted to do, right? Or you take 4 sectoral electives, housing, sanitation, transportation, because you want to survey your different sectors. Or you take all of them that add up because you're very clear where you want to go, right? So the electives are, the choice of the electives really allows learners to customize basically the second half of the fellowship. But the biggest difference between electives and commons is that the electives will push you to proposition. Unlike the commons, which push you to analysis, framing, and diagnosis, the electives push you and say, what are you going to do? Now, remember, what you're going to do can be a very reductive question. It can be a very solution-centric, big fix, immediate action question. But it can also be a question that is held much more broadly conceptually. So, for example, we could say, what kinds of practices can you imagine taking on? What is your mode of engaging with this question? Who do you see yourself doing it as? And these, for us, these notions of practices are very wide. I'm using the word practice and not just tool or action, because I think it's very important to say that practices are also rooted and come from a sense of belief that they will work, but also belief of the kind of practitioner you want to be. So activism is a practice. Financial analysis is a practice. Teaching is a practice. Research is a practice. Advocacy is a practice. Delivery is a practice. Project management is a practice. Very often we confuse practice, especially in the elective term, with a certain professional practice that we see. But that's not what we mean. We mean a much broader sense of urban practice. And you will see when you're doing the electives why we taught you the commons. Because in one very clear sense, until you have the interdisciplinarity of the commons, you are not able to accept the solution narrowness of an elective. It's only when the commons underlies the electives are you able to say, don't forget the example I started with. And so when the sanitation elective tells you about putting toilets into, say as part of the Swachh Bharat mission or in any program, you will remember that toilets are never just about toilets. You will remember from the commons that toilets are equally about caste. They're equally about the economy. They're equally about household aspirations. They're equally about design. They're equally about the public goods and systems of water. They're equally about a physical, material, economic, social object that is doing many things. It's never just a toilet. That framing comes from the commons. So in the elective, what you want to see is, how is your practice different from the fact that you took the commons? And that's the sense where you begin to see the shift in the interdisciplinarity of your work, right? So what electives suit what people is really a question of what your trajectories are, right? So folks that are at this time, you're beginning to think about what kind of urban practitioner you want to be. You've got a sense of yourself. And the electives really root you in these immersive kind of spaces. They're taught in very different ways. Some of them are entirely field-based studios. Some of them are entirely run as workshops. Some are more lecture-led. Some are entirely reading-led. So the pedagogy varies, the form varies, and all your outputs vary. And I think I want to say this around both the commons and the electives. One of the other things that we're committed to in thinking about an interdisciplinary class is that you don't insist on one form of work, which means you don't always write assignments. You don't always do calculations or submit sheets. You actually can produce the mode of your own evaluation. We've had students who do sound pieces. We've had students who've made simulation games. We've had students who write theoretical papers. We have others who write, policy and business plans. And there's a real freedom in thinking about the mode of output. In the commons, we'll control you a lot more. But in the electives, it really begins to open up, right? And remember that and then this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll open it up to questions from you, is that like the practica runs parallel to the theory courses in the commons, the project runs parallel to the elective courses. So the project, for those of you who haven't seen the website fully yet, is a place where you join live practice projects in IIHS teams that are, as you're part of a team doing an ongoing project with a real life client, a real life output, real constraints in a work environment, right? So the sensibility of the elective both in the project and while you're in class, is about preparing you to be a practitioner, and is about getting you to sort of say, how am I going to elevate what the basic learnings I got in the common? How am I going to apply them? What am I going to be? And it's really about you asking yourself, what kind of practitioner do I want to be? What kind of work do I want to do? What kind of scale do I want to work at? What modes of practice do I want to use? Am I a person who really wants to be rooted in a field? Do I want to abstract to the sense of the policy scale? Do I want to research and produce knowledge and have my practice come from there? Do I want to teach? Do I want to organize? Do I want to be present? Do I want to reframe? So when you start thinking about modes of practice, the electives are a place basically where you get to experiment with different modes and say, this is the practice that feels like me. This is the practice that I want to pick up, right? And the project runs in different sizes along with that. So commons with practica running alongside the theory courses, elective with projects running across the elective courses. Commons is required, 6 key weeks, 1 week for each. And after every 2 weeks of teaching in the commons, we give you 1 week in the city again, looking at cases. And that's the last part of the framing of the commons. So if we teach you 6 concepts in the commons, 1 a week, right? Identity first, then planning, then economy, then governance, and infrastructure, then ecology. How do we connect across these 6? How do they not remain separate? So we do that by using what we call an integrated case. An integrated case is a case that you use through the commons to show how actually all of these concepts happen simultaneously and are interlinked. Let me give you an example of an integrated case. This year, our integrated case is on the lakes of Bangalore. So in the identity week, we look a little bit about how lakes are associated with particular kinds of meaning for particular kinds of communities, right? But they aren't just, they're not natural in a simple way, but they have deep social embeddedness for different people with the lakes themselves. In the planning week, you will look at how lakes are objects in spatial planning. How does planning frameworks understand the lake as a spatiality, as a form? In economy, you look at the lake as something that undergirds many economic assumptions of value. In governance, you look at the ways in which lakes fall in the interstices of jurisdictions between multiple agencies and civic action groups, on the question of who actually governs a lake in Bangalore. In ecology, you look at the lake in its most standard form, which is an ecological act, right? But for the 5 weeks before, we've not let you look at the lake as an ecological form, because we're actually reminding you that it's much more than that. And you look at that and the lake as an infrastructure. So what we'll do is we do 2 weeks of teaching and then 1 week on the lakes, 2 weeks of teaching, another week on the lakes, 2 weeks of teaching, another week on the lakes, right? So the integrated case is an element like an accordion that keeps allowing you places to keep connecting across what you're learning. And what's really key about this is that it is actually the way we do assessment, because you get to see yourself responding to the question of lakes in Bangalore differently every time you experience it, right? So the day you come in, we take you to the lakes and you just see them and you make your first assumptions. 3 weeks later, you're looking at the lakes again, but now you've been taught for 2 weeks. 3 weeks later, you're looking at the lakes again, but now you've been taught for 4 weeks. And 3 weeks later, you're looking at the lakes again. So the lakes become a place where you see your own perspectives evolving and all the different things we're teaching you beginning to come together, right? So the commons is really doing a lot of things for you in establishing this foundation, but it's allowing you constant application through the integrated case as well as the practical. The electives are then taking all that framing understanding and saying, now apply it, and apply it in each of these different sectors, these themes, these methods, these techniques, these concepts. Okay, and that's the learning journey of the fellowship. Broad interdisciplinary foundation, applied and rooted in place with the building of basic skills that translates into application and proposition in the electives, run with an actual project where you get to apply it, you exit to the internship and you exit the fellowship. So that's kind of the journey in a way. Okay, so I've said a lot and laid out those questions. So let me open it up for you now. So go ahead and type in your questions into the box and I'll read them out and I'll take them one by one. Okay, so Meghna's asking, at what point of the course do we have to choose our electives? Okay, it's a good question. So you choose them pretty much. So the commons terms ends in Diwali and you choose them right before you go home for Diwali. So you choose the first 2, which are binding on you, and then you have a provisional choice for 3 and 4. And so you pick the first 2 cycles by Diwali. And so you have gone through the commons, your faculty mentors help you think through the discussions. You pick the first 2 and give us a possibility for 3 and 4. You take the first 2, and then in December, we give you a chance to revisit your choices for 3 and 4 if you want. But actually, in the last couple of batches, I feel like everyone has stuck to their choices once they make them, because people typically choose the 4 as a set because they choose either the same or different types of electives. So you choose your electives at the end of the commons, right before you go on your exposure trip and on Diwali break. Okay, so Samad is asking, what are your views on the fellowship for a person already working in this sector? Well, it depends on what you mean by the sector, right? Because there'll be a specific kind of work that you're doing within the urban more broadly. So it will depend a bit on that. But let me say this in general. So people come to the fellowship for 2 or 3 different kinds of reasons. One set of people come who don't know the urban and want to know the urban. And so that's one very good reason to come to the fellowship. You have a curiosity about the urban, but you don't have a sense of where to begin. You don't know how to think about it. And the fellowship gives you a very good introduction and a starting vocabulary on how to do that. The second set of people who come to us are people who've been working in the urban for a particular time, and somewhere in their practice have felt kind of limited, like they're stuck, like they can't move, right? They're sort of like, they want other ways to think about what they're doing. And those folks come to us, like you're saying, who are already in the sector, but they come to reframe the way they've been engaging with the sector. They come to learn other forms of practices. They come to break out from a lot of folks who say, look, I only did one kind of thing. I was only an architect. I only worked on housing. But I felt like when I was working on housing, lots of other things came up and I never knew how to engage with these questions, right? So I felt like in my practice, I kept working on this in the same way. I want a different way to think about my practice, right? So one of the things that you can think a little bit about, one of the ways that you can think about the course for someone who's already in the sector is, what makes you want to apply? So is it that you want more knowledge of a particular kind that you're finding lacking? Is it that you want different kinds of knowledge? Is there something about your practice that you want to reflect on? Or is there a way you want to reposition yourself in the practice market, right? That you don't want to be seen only as a housing person or only as a distinct person? Or do you want to explore a new kind of practice? All of those are good reasons to come to the fellowship. So I would say, don't not come because you're already in the sector. But when you're already in the sector and you're coming, be clear and communicate to us in your application. This is why I want to come. I want to change X about my current practice. I want to grow in Y ways. I want to learn this differently. I want to practice differently. So ask yourself, what is making me attend this webinar? What's making me curious about this fellowship? What's making me want to apply? So there's very good reasons to come to the fellowship having practice. In fact, many people think that that's the best way to come to the fellowship. But you have to be clear about your motivations, or at least clear that something is pushing you to say, I want more than what I know currently. Okay. And okay, so the next question is Kaveri. Kaveri is asking, can you exemplify on what exactly is the project? Yeah. So what happens in the project is that for 2 days a week, so that's 40% of your time, we give you a list of about 40 or so ongoing projects at IIHS, because IIHS does research and practice as well. Now, these are all projects that our teams are involved in, your faculty is involved in, teams at IIHS are involved in. They range from implementation programs on sanitation, research programs on housing, exploratory research programs on environment and conservation, programs on making podcasts and movies, and there's an artist in residence position. So across the disciplinary spread of the class, we basically have work that's going on in IIHS. So every project is an ongoing, and you enter into the project. So we give project descriptions, you apply for those projects and give your preferences, and we fit people as best as we can to their preferences. So you will have research projects where you spend a lot of time in field work, you get to be part of design. So it depends on where the project is and when you enter. You may have direct implementation projects. You may have projects that involve, starting and exploring new areas. You may have projects that involve, the actual laying out the activities of what's currently going on in the project. So they vary across sector, they vary across discipline, they vary across stage. But you spend a whole chunk of time working. So you join the IIHS team. So for us, you would just be another member of the team. You have specific tasks, you're held to deadlines. It's basically like a professional work environment. So it feels like being back in office, which is kind of great. It's still a taught space, as in we still guide you more than we would folks who are just working here. but it's very much a space in which you are meant to perform as part of a team. So the website has examples of projects fellows have done over the past set of years, and I would highly encourage you to look at them. I can tell you the projects I supervised last year, for example. So I supervised one project because I work in Indore with housing rights activists. We had fellows who went and did assessment studies of resettlement of post-eviction housing in Indore 10 years after they were resettled. So they did architectural and quality of life post-occupancy studies. What happens to the quality of life of people who were evicted and resettled 10 years ago? What's the quality of the housing now? So they ran, designed the study, went to Indore, conducted the surveys, finished the report. I supervised a second project on the dynamics of what happens to the Dalit areas of villages incorporated into municipal areas in Bangalore. So we looked at case studies, lots of site work, lots of on-site research practice, lots of writing up. People have worked on live projects with the UP government, which we are doing on redesigning OPDs in government hospitals. One of the fellows produced IIHS's first podcast, and their project was research, script, write, record, edit a podcast. One of our fellows is doing her project as an artist in residence, which she works with our research and converts that research into different kinds of videos. So it's a whole range of applied thing, but it's applied work with external clients, a lot of field work. A lot of projects are Bangalore based, but a lot of projects also involve. One of the projects last year, for example, looked at the spatial footprint of warehousing in digital hyperlocal digital companies in this thing. So there's a real variety across them and where they come in. Jeremiah is asking if someone who is not a citizen of India can apply for the fellowship. I'm afraid the answer this year is no. It's not a choice that we make, but we are restricted by Government of India regulations. So it is limited at this point to Indian citizens. Okay, so Anirudh is asking, what kind of engagement can I expect with environmental anthropology? I tend to understand the bridge between environmental technological interventions and their social settings to influence environment policies in the urban context better. Yeah, no, Anirudh, this is one of the key things that I think that you will, there are several anthropologists on the faculty, and I think that this is a key, the idea of the bridge, what you're calling the bridge between technological intervention, their social settings, is exactly the kind of example I was giving about the commons, right? Which is to think a little bit about things like technology socially, but also think about the social relations as technological spaces. And the questions of the environment in the urban are central to what we do, both from the ecology and environment weeks in the commons. There are elective courses this time in sustainable cities. We've taught courses on climate change and at city level adaptation in many ways. So it's a strong ongoing focus of work, and one of our key areas of research and practice is on these issues. So, for example, one of the projects we're just doing right now is on thinking about critically about the role of leadership in response to disaster management, right? So not the technicalities of structural responses to disaster management and response, but to think of the particular role of individuality and leadership in those responses that shape vulnerability and shape capacity to respond to risk and vulnerability without all the technical ways of thinking about what makes a space more resilient. So I think that you would find, for example, in the projects, our director, Aro, is on the IPCC's, was one of the co-authors of the IPCC's urban chapter, and is one of the co-authors of the new 1.5 degrees Celsius report that just came out. So it's a central part of our research. So I think you will find, a lot in terms of resonance in the content, and methodologically you'd be very at home being an anthropologist. Okay, so Paridhi is asking, are we taught research methodology as well? Yep, you are. And it is, so you're taught inquiry and research design as a common skill lab. So it's a required lab. And then you have elective skill labs on advanced research design and methodology. So you don't have to take the elective ones, but if you're someone who's interested in research, people tend to take that lab. So we teach you design, and we teach you research methods as well. Yeah. Okay, so where do the skill labs fit into the structure of this program? So Meghna is asking, that's a good question. So look, there are two ways to think about it. This is a fellowship, right? It's 7 months taught. So we don't teach you, we cannot teach you methods in a way that would be comparable to 2 years masters. But what we do is basically create a base of set of skills and methods that go alongside the way you're taught, right? So essentially what in terms of skills, there's two ways to think about it. There are the skill labs in the commons, which are required for everybody, because we see these as base practices that you just can't graduate an IIHS course without knowing these things. And we organize those in different ways. So a lot of places teach skills and methods as quantitative and qualitative, right? So this distinction is not something we hold to in IIHS. I find the distinction meaningless, actually, in quite a lot of ways. We teach methods in relationship to inquiry. So the first class you ever do in your skill labs early in the commons is with me, and it's a class called Framing the Inquiry. And that's the first input by the day also into thinking about research methods. Because the first question you ask about research methods is not how do I do this method? It's why do I use one method in one moment and another method in another moment? What is the relationship between my choice of methods and the research that I'm doing? Now, a lot of it tends to happen is that we tend to think our methods are the ones we use are the ones we know. So anthropologists do ethnography, planners do spatial design, designers make things, and economists do analysis, and mathematicians do models, right? Now, there's no reason why a mathematician can't be an anthropologist, does do ethnography, because ethnography doesn't belong to anthropologists as a method. But the way we teach and the way disciplines are divided makes methods seem connected and owned in different places. So we try and break that in interdisciplinary practice. So we are structured in what we call methods in primary research and methods in secondary research. And we separate them only on that part. And the way we teach our methods is to say the only thing that determines the methods you should use is not your training, but the question you're asking. If the question you're asking requires spatial analysis, you learn GIS. If the question you're asking requires a deep engagement with perspective, you learn how to do ethnographic work. If your question requires a predictive structural kind of explanatory power, you learn how to do models and build predictive mathematical questions. So it's very important for us that one delinks a type of training, a type of discipline, and a type of method. So skill labs are a place where we do that. So the skill labs in the commons will be core skill labs that you have to show us that you can do. And the skill labs in the electives are a skill lab in the electives are places that are important for us to get you to then begin to hone the skills you want, given the trajectory that you are putting through. So again, the one thing to remember is that those skills will reflect all the disciplines in the room. So you will have skill labs in media, you will have skill labs in GIS, you'll have skill labs in writing, you'll have skill labs in technical analysis, data visualization. I teach a skill lab called From Narrative to Argument, which is more about academic writing. You will have a skill lab in research methods, etc., etc. Cool. Also in financial budget analysis, and I keep forgetting those ones. So, you know, the what people call the hard, proper skills, as my parents used to say. They have a whole set of things in those. Okay. So Ankit is saying, I'm currently pursuing my third year of PhD in planning at NIT Jaipur. What is the preferred stage to take up this course, and will it hamper my current enrollment? So Ankit, if you're already in the third year of the PhD, I would suggest you think really long and hard about what makes you apply to another course. So you are mid-degree, and so I would have to know a lot more about why you wanted, in a sense, to shift. We would want to be convinced that you have a good reason for wanting to come to a taught degree somewhere else when you are thinking about the PhD itself. So I can't answer this question directly, but I think for all of you, when you're thinking about what makes you apply to the fellowship, you should see where you are. Either you're practicing, or you're in this PhD program, you've just come out of your BA, you've just come out of some kind of master's. Think about what makes you want to apply at this time, because we're going to want to see that in your application. We're going to want to see you tell us what makes you want to come. So maybe you can write a separate email to our info address and they'll forward it to me and I can answer. So I want to know specifically what makes you want to apply to this fellowship while being MIT's PhD. And I think that would temper my answer to that question. So you can think a little bit about reasons for applying if you want. We can talk a bit about applications and selections if you want as well. You can talk about life at IIHS, a little bit more if you want about pedagogical forms or faculty. The world is your oyster. What is the alumni doing post the fellowship? Okay, that's a good question. So a whole chunk of things. So one is that there's all their profiles. Many of their profiles are on the website. So check out some of the testimonials and you'll get a sense of what they're doing. And we've also begun to put up a couple of videos in this week or so that show some of what they're doing now. So we have a whole range. So again, so I would say two transit trajectories. There's folks who enter the program and remain in their sector, but use us to distinguish themselves. For example, a journalist from 2 years ago who passed through, went back, is writing with the Mint right now, but does the urban beat, right? So was a journalist, stayed in journalism, but focuses on writing about cities. And we have a bunch of folks who do that, who are, because there's a lot in the media spaces where people want specialized content, right? So we have 2 or 3 journalists like this. One is writing for India's Pen now, one is writing for the Mint, and one is the editor of The Wire Urdu. He set up The Wire Urdu with them, and it's currently with them. So there's a whole bunch of folks in journalism who came from there. Then we have a whole set of folks who went the research PhD route. Not that many, but a whole bunch of folks who used the fellowship to understand what they wanted to do their master's in or what they wanted to do their PhD in. And this is typically true also of folks who come to us right after their BA, so a little bit on the younger side, and then use us to say, okay, that's what I want to do my master's in. Or folks who worked for a couple of years, want to go back to school, but don't know how to just randomly go back to school. So use us as a way to figure out a focus and a practice and do it. We have a whole set of folks in the development sector that are moving in different ways. So folks who work for mid-sized firms on governance, like Nagrika or Prayas, work for ITDP in transportation. We have folks who work on the more big development consulting side. So we have graduates who work for BCG, for KPMG, for CBRE. We have folks who work in government. We have folks who work for the Lal Bahadur Shastri of National Academy of Administration, for example, in the IIHS Training School. We have a lot of folks who work on the movement side of things, who work for places like Yuva and IGSSS, who work on housing rights issues, who work with SEVA and in that space. We have a bunch of folks who are working in research and policy spaces or associates at TIS and at CE. So I would say there's a research track, there's a development practice track, there's a kind of big development consultancy and applied practice track. There's an art creative practice track. So one of our fellows is the cinematic photographer for all of Anurag Kashyap's films. And so it's called Kamka Photo Artist. You should look him up. Cayman is an independent practitioner, works now. We have folks who work in art historians, who work in urban heritage. We have a lot of folks who work in planning firms, on planning and infrastructure delivery options. We have folks who work in water and sanitation firms. So this is the third part, which is not development sector, but applied utility, private sector practice in medium and large space, right? Who run projects, who build things, who work out in different ways. So it's a real range of folks that work, and it's been really quite interesting to watch them and then watch them now, you know, with 4 batches in, really work in really tremendous ways. So I'd encourage you to look at some of the profiles and talk to the alumni. All of them are very happy to talk about what their trajectories after the program, and we can pick that up. I hope that answered the question. Okay, so Anirudh is saying, if I'm to come with a particular question I'd like to answer in the fellowship, for example, identifying best methodologies for lake restoration, is it required? If it is required fieldwork outside the scope of a traditional project towards the end of the course, I should be able to take help from the faculty. Star meaning outside the scope, meaning if timeline requires it to bring earlier through the career. Yes, so I mean, I would say it this way, until the commons are on, we will be reluctant to let you off on your own trajectories. But you have the ability to frame your own project. And every year, it's tough. We make the fellows design it and pitch it to us. So it will be an inquiry like the one you outlined, at which point through the elective terms, so from October through March, you would have time to work on this on your own. So there is an option for you to do your project as an independent project of your own inquiry, which can require fieldwork, which you can do on your own time. Remember, you have 2 days a week, which is 40% time, which is not bad at all. In the commons, this will be difficult, but it certainly, and with faculty supervision, you can absolutely do an independent project if you have an inquiry that you want to work on particularly. Yeah, you can. And every year, a bunch of fellows do it. Okay, what have I got next? Okay, Samita is asking, can there be aspects of psychology that can be analyzed with the program, like not just technical aspects, for example, the behavioral analysis of the social psyche of the community? As you mentioned, people are working the, oh, that's a separate question. Okay, so there are aspects of this, and we're happy, honestly, for you to bring it in. It's not a structural part of our teaching, but there's a lot of scope for, I mean, one of the nicest things about this program is that actually every year the content we transact feels very different, because the mix of disciplines in the room is very different. So if you're in the room and you're a psychologist, there will be more psychology in the room. And we're happy to take that perspective on, and we learn from you. We'll pick up the questions. we'll see what it means to look at the same thing a different way. So yeah, I mean, if you're there will be psychology. I think that's the openness of it in many kinds of ways. It's not a directed focus the way our faculty teaches, but every year, depending on the batch of fellows we get, we teach a different way because the fellows bring something different in. Like for example, this year we had a bunch of fellows who were very interested in mental health. And so mental health kept coming up in different ways in project and elective spaces. And the faculty was teaching the Urban Health Collective, just curated a whole day of sessions on it because the students were interested. So you can very much pick up and we'll respond to it and run with it and see how it goes. Okay, so Paridhi is saying, as you mentioned, people are working in the heritage sector. Can you put some light on the relation between the term urban and heritage? Sure, I can, because the fellows have taught me how to speak about this and not sound like an idiot. So as far as I understand, it's not my place, it's not my field, it's not my training. But so the question of heritage is an interesting one, right? Because it is linked to certain practices vis-a-vis the urban. So the first question is, what does one think about heritage as? And the simplest way is to think about a kind of museum-style conservation of things that are old and historical, right? But the frame that IIHS uses more is a frame called living urban heritage. And so that is a way to think about heritage in a way that doesn't isolate it as something to be protected from change, but to recognize the only way you can actually hold on to heritage of different kinds is to put it into the everyday of the city. That heritage is actually about the invocation of history through the present, not a museumification and conservation of history as it was. So how do you work with living urban heritage, right? So this actually means everything from thinking about how heritage can be used in planning as an act of preservation, but also an act of stagnation. So I'll give you an example from Delhi, which is where I'm from. Lutyens Delhi, all of central Delhi, right? All those big boulevarded, low bungalows, roundabout things, all of it is a World Heritage Zone. Now, in one way, you're saying you're preserving a certain kind of heritage. Now, this is interesting, the conservation of colonial heritage, right? So you can think about what that means about what we're preserving. But for planners who are concerned with equity and housing, it's also a bloody disaster because the density of central Delhi is 330 people per square kilometer. The density of East Delhi is 17,000 people per square kilometer. And we can't touch Lutyens Delhi for densification purposes or urban equity purposes because it's heritage. So heritage for us is also a contested political terrain about what it means to think of something as worth preserving and not, and what those trade-offs are and where those costs come from. And how you think of living heritage is a way that grapples with these trade-offs instead of just saying this is worth preserving and this is not, right? So there are many practices around. One of our fellows last year did her work with Intac in Jammu before she joined us. And she came to us and she said, you know, all we used to do is list buildings we thought were worth preserving, but we had no relationship to why we were doing that and what it meant to the city of Jammu's changing urbanization patterns, right? So I think that there's a lot to discover in questions of heritage and urbanism. For us, it's not a simple question of just thinking about history and conservation. It's about an approach to living urban heritage that sees heritage as a political question, like questions of environment and development, like questions of housing and growth, like that we link in a set of trade-offs. Right? Think back to the Commons. This is an excellent example in the Commons on saying, okay, how would the economists look at heritage as a conservation of value? How would the anthropologists look at heritage as the manifestation of what gets counted as culture and what doesn't, right? So whose heritage we consider worth preserving and who don't? What is a tomb and what is just a random structure? What about sacred animist traditions like tribal conservation cultures in Ranchi? Like how do we think of that as heritage and not just built form? And so heritage is culture, heritage is form. So I can go on about this in a time, but you get the idea that we think about this in this sort of mixed way. Okay, Sanhita, off-track question. Good, excellent. What do fellows do on the weekend or let's say after they finish the class on a day? So it depends on how lazy the batch is. The earlier batches used to vanish every weekend because Bangalore is singularly geographically the best positioned city in the south. So you are an overnight from North Kerala, you're an overnight from Goa, you're an overnight from Hampi, you're an overnight from North Tamil Nadu, you're an overnight from Gokarna. I mean, you can literally get out every weekend and just really explore everything else. So I would love to say that they spend the weekends reading and preparing for class. I know this not to be true and I'm happy for it. We used to have a really great badminton league. So I used to play badminton with some of the fellows on Saturdays and that is what we did. So there's exploration, there's time in the city, there's some reading time, there's some work time. Remember, everyone lives together and that gives a sense of real conviviality and learning. That's a very critical part of the fellowship, is the fact that all the fellows live together. And I think that's one of those things. So the only thing I'll tell you is that every time I hear anything from the fellows is that the weekend goes too fast. So they're clearly not bored. I don't know what else to say about everything they do. But it is an intense program. So you are in class till about 4 or 5. So it's also not that you have oodles of time. It's a tough program. You come in and we work you for 7 months. If we only have you for 7 months, we'll work for you 7 months. Okay, so let me pick up another one. All right, Nena. The other thing I should tell Samita, the other thing is that, the other thing you guys should tune into is that we have 4 big convenings in IIHS a year. A 3-day film festival called Urban Lens, a 3-day writing festival called City Scripts, a policy dialogue called the Urban Policy Dialogues, and a research conference called Urban Arc. And so there's also a consistent series of publics and events. So a lot of the evenings are actually spent on events on campus. Okay. Nena says, sir, you don't have to call me sir, no one ever does. Is it possible to look at specific questions like waste? Is IIHS working on waste? Yeah, absolutely. We do lots and lots and lots and lots of work on waste. It's a key part of our teaching. It's a key part of our practice. There are projects on it, and you will have no choice but to engage with the question of waste. So it's a very good place to come and work on that. Yeah, it's a great topic. Okay, so Andre, this thing is a very confused bachelor's graduate. I'd love to know what your trajectory was with education and how did you get there? Sure. I want to make a few changes to my application as I feel like I have more clarity on what the fellowship entails and might have a hastily the first time round instead of where I can apply again. Again, no? You just take the second application? I think so, no? Anirudh, will you put this question of applying again into the info email address so we can confirm? I have a feeling that you can, and we will just take the... Okay, Shruti is also asking about a few changes to my application. So will you guys do me a favor? Will you both just write into that email we have on the website? I think it's info at something. I should have it. I should know this. Wait, I have resources in front of me. ufp.info@ihs.ac.in. Okay, so if you can please email that address. You can't read that, but I'll just do that. So if you send that particular question, my gut is yes, and we will just treat the later application and delete your first application. But please just confirm this and we'll reply to you on that. Yeah. So Anirudh was asking about how did I get my so confused bachelor's graduate. So I'll tell you what I did. I don't recommend it, and I certainly please don't take it as a map on how to structure your life, but it's just what I did. So I had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do, but I had this vague sense that I wanted to do something around development and social change, something I had. So I had no clue. And because I was a confused 17-year-old basic kid, I was like, one must study economics because that is what good people do. And because I got good marks in school, I basically decided that that's what one does. I started studying economics and I got really frustrated because it seemed utterly ridiculous and made up to me. So I'm like guns, butter, demand, supply, 3,000 assumptions. And I was like, this shit is not happening. And so then I started studying politics because it occurred to me that the economics never happened without politics. And I was, again, I was in it and I was studying in college in the States. And I basically said, no, these two have to go together. And then I had this brilliant professor called Amrita Basu who taught me, who was a feminist political theorist. And so then I got bit by feminist theory, and then I could never go back. So therefore, I ended up doing gender, development, political economy kind of things through my undergrad. And my degree literally says interdisciplinary studies. So that's where I was. And then I came back to Delhi and I was working for many years. And then I applied for a master's in interdisciplinary social sciences because I still was like, no, but I'm interested in this. But in my master's, I actually found the urban. I actually found that cities held for me, they brought together all the things I really cared about, but also really enjoyed. So there was a way in which I could think about inequality. There's a way I could think about scale. There's a way I could think about form. I could think about places, and I felt really rooted. And so the city actually gave me a way to structure what I did. And so when I went back for my PhD, I applied in city and urban studies and planning. And my PhD is from Berkeley. And that's when I knew what I wanted to do. So until then, everyone told me that I was, everyone used to say, he seems smart, but he has no focus. But the good news is now they say he has a wide breadth of experience and interest. So in time, all your confusion will be an excellent addition on your CV. So don't worry about it and follow your gut and follow your instinct. And it's fine for you to be confused about what you want to do. But when you're applying to the program, don't sound confused about the urban. So that's my advice to you. I'm totally fine with your saying, look, I know there's something about cities that I really like, but I don't know what it is. Perfect. But if you just say, I want to find anything I want, why not this? And that's not going to read very well. So all we need to see from you is that you have a deep sense of curiosity about the urban, that much work you've done, that you know that there's something about cities that fascinate you and that you care about, or that you feel is important, that you're just struggling with and you're in them and you're like, how do I live here? How do I change this? How do I work here? You give us that sense and that's what we want. So I think you find your ways all the, thanks, Anita's telling me that she and all of you are smiling to my advice. I'm very pleased about this. I'm very passionate about this fetishization of clarity, where everyone thinks that everyone has to know what they're doing at all times. If that ever happened, it would be the death of poetry. It would be the death of art. It would be the death of human beings being interesting, right? And we would all be MBAs. I have nothing against MBAs. I think they're great. But the people who want to be MBAs and people who are MBAs is a big distinction in that Venn diagram. So I think that the thing that we want from you is a deep sense of curiosity and a deep sense of knowing where you're coming from and what you're looking for. That's it. What you'll find is completely separate. But convince us a little bit on that, right? And I think that the other thing that I will say is one of the things we do in the fellowship is that we have a series of master classes. Those master classes are not concept classes that are taught. The master classes are actually practitioners, and some of them are activists, some of them are senior government people. Everyone from Nandan Nilikani will do a masterclass, and then Nikhil Day of RTI will do a masterclass. So like they come from everywhere, right? And they basically tell you how they became who they became. And it's exactly an answer to your question. How does one decide to become who one is, right? Which is how do you know what to be when you grow up? The only thing I can tell you is that question never goes away, right? But you make the next set of decisions. You find some modes that begin to feel like you. That's all you have to do. And everyone will tell you that we all tell our life histories as if we made very conscious, clear, rational decisions from step A to go to step B. Nothing like that is true. I ended up working on urban housing because I used to work in a basti. The basti got demolished, and the day the bulldozer came, I became a housing rights activist. That's it. I had never thought of it. I never planned to do it, but something happened to me and I didn't look away, right? I think that's part of, it's a mix of decision, opportunity, intention, and life, and where we tune in and what we become. So give yourself a sense to really think about where you are now and use the fellowship in a way to find modes to either concretize that or explore it. You can do both in any of these. Okay, so Rana is saying, I'm an urban planning student, but I still want to be at UFP at IIHS. Want suggestions? No, come. We have lots and lots of planners who come. We have a limit to how many planners we admit, like for all disciplines, but we have lots and lots of planners who come, and you're more than welcome here. I think there is I would tell you the same thing I said to the person who asked the question about being in the sector. Think about why you want to come having studied planning, right? So it could be, I studied planning, but I don't have enough of this. I studied planning, but I want also this. I want planning plus this interdisciplinarity, plus this location. As long as you have that relationship, that you feel like there are things you want to learn, then it's absolutely fine for you to come from planning into the program. Some of the things that will happen, you'll know, but most of them you won't. We don't teach a planning program. We don't teach a planning plus program. We teach a program on urban practice. But I will warn you on one thing. Sometimes our planners, because they have heard the terms we use, think that they understand it, right? So they'll be like, "Ha, infrastructure to maine padha hai," right? But we don't teach infrastructure the way many people teach infrastructure. So the thing there is that if you come from planning to the program, come. But come with an open mind that you will have to unlearn some of what you think is planning and learn what we think is planning, right? Don't come in saying, let me see what's new for me and I'll only pick that up. So come with an open mind. And again, think about what makes you want to learn or unlearn or learn beyond having already learned planning. But if you compare our curriculum to a curriculum of planning, you will find a very small overlap. Okay, we're almost at time, so I'll take a last couple of questions before we close up. And I give you back your Monday, Tuesday?
Thursday.
Today's Thursday?
No, today's Monday. We'll meet them again Thursday.
Oh, Thursday. I was going to return to you whatever day of the week, Monday evening that this is. Sorry.
And if they have any, that person wants to apply, can you just UFP or info?
That's right. Okay. So for Anirudh and for your welcome, Rana, for Shruti and Anirudh, who want to reapply, again, just send the email to ufp.info@ihs.ac.in, and the email is also on the website. Yes, Anirudh, the reapplication is addressed to you as well. So I'm pretty sure of this, but I just want you to confirm. So if you and Shruti just write into the general ufp.info email and say you want to reapply, then what we'll do is we'll see your new application and we'll delete your old application off the system. Okay, but guys, don't take a little time to apply if you want to do that. Huh? It's not good practice to keep applying again and again. So we'll do it this one time, and let's not try and do it again and again. Okay, I think we are good. I don't see any questions coming. So let me give you a last piece of unsolicited advice, taking teacherly privilege. When you apply, right? So when you apply, don't try and game the application. Don't try and write an application that you think sounds sophisticated and very smart and sounds very erudite. Write like yourselves. The thing that we will note, we're not interested in where you went to school. We're not interested in how fabulous you were. You are not applying to a program that that is you don't have to show us that you like excelled at everything. I honestly couldn't give a shit what your GPA was or what you got, exams you got in your marks. None of it matters. What we want to read in your application is a sense that you think, feel, and are deeply curious about the urban. Okay, we want your curiosity. We don't want your expertise. If you were expertise, you wouldn't need to come and be a student here. Right? So to try and communicate to us that there are things you think about, there are things you're passionate about, there are things that, and when you do that, try and show us that you've been thinking about them for some time. So locate yourself in your application, locate yourself in your answers, locate yourself in your essay. Don't worry about your language, don't worry about your English, don't worry about the sophistication, don't try and write in that kind of horrible, like forthwith kind of like way that we think we write when we're serious. Don't quote Khalil Gibran more than once, like just write like yourself. Like, and really, if we get a sense of you, and we get a sense that here's a person who genuinely is like, look, this is my deal. This is where I am, this is what I want, and I feel like this will be really good for me right now. We want to see a fit. And a fit means we want to see that you understand the fellowship, you spend time understanding its curriculum, you understand what it is, you understand what it isn't, and that your expectations from the fellowship are aligned to the fellowship, right? So that simple sounding question, why do you want to be an urban fellow, is possibly the most important question in your fellowship. Because what we want to see is that you will benefit from being here, that you get what it is and you're at the right place in your life and you thought about it. You didn't randomly apply because you had something to apply to. You thought about it and want to do this at this time in your life. So locate yourself in it and then give us a sense that you think about these things. You ask questions, you're curious, you had experiences, you want to understand, you want to know more. And the more we get that sense from you in your application, the better shot you'll have. Okay, so curiosity, passion, interest, rootedness, and a frank sense of honesty in yourself. Applications that read like they're trying to sound like somebody else or sound very academic or sound very fancy are ones you see through that quite quickly. Okay, so don't think of a traditional application here. You're not being evaluated on the sterlingness of your CV. You're being evaluated on your fit and where you are right now and how you think about the program. Okay, so that's my one unsolicited advice. Also, because I have to read hundreds of these, and I would much rather read fun, happy, curious, story-filled applications than hear about your extracurricular activities, which honestly I'm sure are stellar, but don't tell me anything about what you're like in a classroom. Okay, so that was my 2 paisa worth of advice. Good luck to all of you. I hope all of you apply. Please also help us. Oh, that's okay. Anirudh is saying, didn't quite get the reason as to why my first application didn't get through. No, it's there, but you said you wanted to change it, right? So if you've submitted it, you're not going to be able to change it, which is why we'll have to think a little bit about if you want to consider a second application. I'm asking you to write to the UFP address so that you can say you want your first application deleted from the system, which will allow you to open a new application. What you should not do is open a second application with a different email with the same name, because then we'll have 2 and we will not be sure if they're the same person or not, and that's not right. So the reason I said that you want to write in and say you want to do a second application is because you said you already submitted one. Am I right? Yeah. No, maybe I got that wrong. Anirudh, you already submitted an application, right? Just type in your answer. Okay, there's some good. Okay, so why don't you just use the email, and if I've not understood the query right, then just go, we'll clarify that on the email. We're quite responsive on that ufp.info, so we'll figure that out. Maybe I misunderstood wrong, misunderstood, whatever that was. Okay, cool, all good. Let us end out here, and oh, he's already applied. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Sounds good, guys. Thank you for listening. I hope you had a good webinar. The next webinar is on Thursday at 5 o'clock, where my colleague Teja Maladi, who anchors our geospatial lab and teaches a lot of our JS work, who also anchors our Practica, is going to have a webinar specifically on the Practica, which is one of our key curriculum elements at IIHS. So I would advise you to tune back in, listen up, and send off any questions. And otherwise, take good care. and good luck. And I hope to read many of your applications as they come in. Ciao. Bye.